Hi there, it's Albert Kaufman. I'm a local resident here in Portland, Oregon, and tonight we're going to be talking about trees and the tree code in Portland and saving the urban forest here. A number of us have been experiencing some tree issues in our neighborhoods, and we have a group of people who are very caring and who have some expertise in tree issues and neighborhood life. And so we're going to talk to you tonight about the issues that are coming before us and give you some history as well as some things that you can do to preserve our canopy in Portland and beyond. So without further ado, again, my name is Albert Kaufman, and I'd like everyone to take a moment and introduce themselves.
Robert McCullough. I'm chairman of Southeast Uplift, the 20 neighborhoods here in Southeast Portland.
Very good.
Paul Steele. I'm a Southeast Portland resident. I've been in my house for 25 years now, and I'm here as a neighborhood resident.
Excellent.
My name is Arthur Bradford. I live on Martin Street next to the 3 giant sequoias you might have heard about, and I'm now head of Save the Giants.
Excellent. So why don't we start off with some history. Each of us has some history with some particular trees and perhaps also involvement in the neighborhoods where these issues happen. I'd like you to start off and give a little historical perspective, your own involvement, and up to today if you want to.
Okay, I'll try to keep it short, but I live right next door to 3 giant sequoia trees. They're estimated to be almost 150 years old, and I found out early this summer that a developer, Everett Custom Homes, had gotten permits to cut down all 3 of those trees. We were shocked when we heard that, and we asked the city if there was a mistake, but we learned that he was allowed to do that, and we kind of just accepted that that was what was going to happen. Early in the summer, on the day that those trees were supposed to be cut down, there were news trucks and lots of protesters, and the trucks didn't show up. Instead, Mr. Remmers agreed to meet with some of the neighborhood, including Robert, and he told us that he would sell us the land for $900,000. We basically, to make a long story short, we did not have that money. So towards the end of the summer, into September, we'd been trying to figure out a way around this. We had even submitted plans to him that were very viable, that he could build the same number of houses without cutting down the trees. And we thought he was considering those plans, but then one morning we saw trucks coming up the street with chainsaws, and the neighborhood rushed out. We had an action plan, and people stood under those trees and refused to let the cutters cut them down. The police came, told everyone they would be arrested, but nobody left. In fact, more people stood under the trees, and so the cutters all went home, and we thought that was nice, but we figured the trees were going to come down still. But then an amazing thing happened, and people might have heard about this. Activists arrived, more people throughout the city, and the week became sort of a standoff. A young man named Lorax Dave camped out in the branches, and the police raided the site, and eventually the mayor called Robert into his office and the developer, and they reached a deal, and the neighborhood was able to buy back the trees and save them.
Fantastic. Robert, do you want to add in some of your perspective? Now, we're talking about Eastmoreland neighborhood, and we're talking about Vic Remmers, who's the developer, and Everett Custom Homes, which is the name of the company that's involved in this development.
Absolutely. I'm going to face the camera instead of you.
That's fine.
So Southeast Portland has a huge number of trees. It's most of the population in the city lives in this area, middle-class people. And we moved there because of the urban canopy. The city's rules have eroded over time, and so it's now possible to cut down trees without much difficulty at all. In fact, Mr. Remmers was going to pay $1,200 a tree to cut down something that was worth untold thousands of dollars for just the wood. So it was profitable to basically clear the lumber out of parts of Eastmoreland. We've been working on this for some years. People all over the city are very active in trying to bring us back to our values, which involve environmentalism and land use and public participation. The neighbors on the street did almost all the work. I periodically would show up and pontificate. That's what neighborhood chairs do. The key part of this is when Mr. Remmers overreached. He showed up without warning. He threatened to cut the trees, scared a lot of people, attracted a lot of attention, finally managed to get the police coming to try to arrest people. Terrible error. And when the mayor finally got a sense of the gravity of it, he empowered us to get done. Mr. Remmers gave back a fair amount of money in that and a number of important concessions, which made it possible for us to get to the result we have now. But the important issue is for our future. We're working with City Hall, try to get the bad rules fixed, get back on the path we connect with Portland.
Okay, fantastic. So on my left is Paul Steele, who's been very involved in the same issue in the neighborhood that we both live in, which is the Richmond neighborhood. Do you want to give some background and how you got involved and where things are?
Yeah, Richmond was a working class neighborhood. The trees that we're protecting are 200-plus-year-old Doug firs. We did lose one tree on September 12th when the tree cutting crews from Morton Tree Services on behalf of Everett Custom Homes came and simply started taking down the tree at 9 o'clock in the morning. No one in the neighborhood had any idea that these trees were going to be removed. A month ago, I wouldn't, if you could have described to me that you can take down 100-year-old, 100-foot tall, healthy trees at a cost of $1,200 and basically with no real neighborhood involvement, I would have said, well, no, that can't happen. But I found out the hard way that it can happen. After we lost the first tree, there was just an instant mobilization of folks in the neighborhood. It was basically families with kids and dogs who came and basically occupied the corner. And our trees were scheduled to be cut on Monday, according to the tree service. And we simply stood under the trees and wouldn't leave. We parked our cars on all of the sides of the streets, so there was no access for the crews to come in. One of our neighbors climbed the tree and stayed there all day. We had a lot of presence from media. We didn't have any police, although I think most people were prepared to face that if they needed to. But again, this was something that we simply didn't see coming and most of us didn't know was possible. Now I know that it is possible, and it's happening everywhere in town. Right.
So I'll talk a little bit about my own experience. I learned about the trees in my neighborhood being threatened and coming down through a website called nextdoor.com, which, if you're not on it, is a great way to be connected with your neighbors, whether you've lost a cat, whether you have some extra plums, or whether some kind of an emergency is happening in your neighborhood. So I am a rather active user of social media. I teach social media classes, and I've actually written an article about Nextdoor that is on my website if you're interested. But I learned, through a posting that had quite a lot of comments quickly coming, that some trees were that one tree had been cut down on September 12th and that the others were threatened. And so I quickly went to the site and saw the people in action. And I think what was really fascinating to me, and what's been fascinating to me all along, is that through the mobilization of people and through this common worry and concern over something so precious in our neighborhood as 100-foot trees, 90-year-old Doug firs, whose diameter is wider than this table. I mean, quite a bit wider than this table. Through that action, we've actually been brought closer together as a neighborhood. And through Nextdoor and through Facebook and the Old Trees PDX meme, through the folks doing the work on the sequoias, our neighborhood has been brought closer together. We're more organized than we've ever been. And whether it's to save the trees or to save something else that's precious to us or to build something, personally, I'm really interested in seeing the lot that the house was demolished on at 41st and Clinton be turned into a pocket park, possibly an orchard or a community garden. And that's what I'd like to see happen, and I'm organizing for that. And these tools that are out there right now are just fantastic for that. So we are now at a point where the 2 trees that are left at our intersection are currently going to be left alone for the time being. The developer has told us that they are working with an arborist to try to figure out how to save the trees and still build the houses that he wants to build. I personally would like to see something else happen. But more interesting to me is, where do we go from here? How do we as a city, how do we as a state, how do we as a country, how do we as a world save precious trees? As climate change continues, these trees are not only good for our neighborhoods, these trees are good for the planet. And Oregon has a huge reputation as a place that's doing massive amounts of clear cutting. When you go out into the Oregon Coast Range or in the Cascades, you just see clear cutting going on like crazy. I think we had 4 billion board feet of trees cut last year in Oregon, and personally I would like to see that number go way down. I would personally like to see a moratorium on cutting, and particularly a moratorium on cutting big trees in Portland. So that's something we're going to talk about next, is the tree code. And all of us have a various familiarity with the Portland tree code, where it has been. Paul mentioned that it costs a developer $1,200 to cut down basically anything, and they pay that fee to the city, which what does that cover? So let's talk about some alternatives to the tree code, and what we're trying to do with the tree code next. So I know, Paul, do you want to go ahead and
grab this
jump
for
in?
a moment. Okay, Portland's unusual. We don't have aldermen. We have neighborhood associations. The neighborhood associations are very active. The various codes come out in debate between the neighbors and the city. This new tree code was actually only put in place this year. It has a lot of problems. One thing you need to know about Portland is that you don't stop by listening to the bureaucrat on the telephone. You actually have to go down and look up what's happening. You have to check it. And sometimes you find he has it wrong. In the case we had here on Martins, there were a lot of things that were wrong. And if we had not ended up negotiating, we would have gone for a temporary restraining order and had a judge bring it to a halt. So the first thing you need to know is, this is not a federal law settled 3,000 miles away. These are rules set downtown. You can drive over and talk to the decision maker. That's underway now. We need you to do it. And to do that, you need to check in with your neighborhood association and your coalition office and your neighbors. Nextdoor, by the way, is a great tool. And actually find out who to call and what button to push. At the moment, people are in front of all 5 commissioners trying to change that $1,200 price. And I am certain that with your help, we can do it.
Great. I'd like to have Paul talk a little bit about the Canadian tool that you had mentioned to me before. If you'd like to stress, there are different ways of measuring the value of these trees, and you brought that up with me.
Yeah, I don't have a technical background in forestry, but having worked with some of the community groups, there are ways that you can go out and calculate what's called the bioeffect of a tree in terms of how much carbon does it store, how much CO2 does it filter out of the air. And you can put in the species of tree, where it's located, and you can calculate out what the effect that tree produces for the environment. Right now, it's kind of severed from that. Again, we have a flat fee of $1,200 to take a tree down. And in response, that $1,200 goes into a remediation fund where there's some offset somewhere else at a different location, or you can plant on the site. But again, the thing that really just floored me was that there's really no disincentive for a developer simply to take trees down. It's faster and easier for them to build by simply flattening the ground and not having to preserve those trees. One of the other issues is that there are different rules for development than there are for the homeowner. And I've had so many people say, well, as a homeowner, you have to go through an elaborate process and get permission to remove trees, and you have to have a city forester approve your plan. That's for the homeowner, but for a developer, it's a very different set of rules, and those rules are friendly to the developer, and they're decidedly not friendly towards the trees. So one of the things that we're pushing is that there be some sort of economic incentive to preserve trees, and right now there is not. And you can calculate that in a number of different ways by size or by bioeffect, but one of the things we're asking the city to do is to look at what we're losing, and if we do lose a specific tree, that really has to be made up in a meaningful way.
You mentioned also earlier that there's a meeting coming up downtown.
Right. There's a working group that the City of Portland has for revisions to what's called the Title 11 Tree Code. And they meet on the second Monday of the month. That's at the City of Portland building at 1900 on Southwest 4th, which is right by PSU. It's not City Hall, it's up the street from there. To give the city credit, most of these meetings are open. Any citizen can come, be present. You don't always get to speak, but you can be present.
Great. Arthur, do you have any thoughts about, scenes we'd like to see? Where would you like things to go and how?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think it's frustrating for the average citizen to hear about the tree code. I think everyone's in agreement it needs to get fixed, but right now we're stuck watching these big trees get cut down, seemingly when there are alternatives. And I think the things that we come against when we're upset about it is people say, well, hey, there's lots of trees in Portland. What's the big deal? One's getting cut down. And I think people should be aware that that's a dangerous attitude, that we really do need these trees. Portland has a diminishing urban canopy right now, and the temperature in Portland in the summer is very high, and as a city we have what's called an urban heat zone, and it's because of the lack of trees. So that's a big deal. I think people need to understand that. I think there needs to be an economic incentive not to cut down trees, but I don't think that it necessarily needs to get built into a tree code, although I do agree that there should be a higher fine. I think that developers that cut down trees and clear-cut land like that, we shouldn't patronize developers like that. We should not sell our houses to them. We should not buy their houses that they are offering to the public. There's a lot of people out there maybe watching this who probably have houses that they might sell in the next 5 years. Don't sell to Everett Custom Homes. Don't sell to Renaissance Homes. All they're going to do is knock down your house, cut down all the trees, and build something that is not as good as what was there before. I think people should be aware of that, and they should not patronize those companies until they improve themselves. If Everett Custom Homes does not cut down those trees on Clinton Street, we should say that's good, but they can even do better.
Right.
I checked the carbon impact of our 3 sequoias, and if he had gotten his way 2 weeks ago, it would have been the equivalent of adding 10,000 automobiles to the Portland streets.
Wow.
Those are huge trees. There's a huge amount of sequestered carbon. It is a disaster to destroy them. What we need to do is to preserve our heritage in this. And I wrote the other day to one of the newspapers, and I said it's important that a few hundred years from now, that Arthur's great-great-great-great-grandkids can say, great-great-granddad did good in this case. That's very important to us in Portland.
Right. And, in that regard, speaking of young people and future generations, if you want to do something educational with your kids, take them to one of these spots where these giant trees are threatened and show your children the trees and have them commune with the trees. They get it. The kids that are going to the trees at Clinton and 41st, they get it. Last week when I was there, a bunch of them had made buttons. They take their chalk and they chalk up the sidewalks with "Save the Trees." They understand that the trees are also homes for squirrels and birds and oxygen for the rest of us. So speaking of trees and young people and planting trees, hi Friends of Trees, did you want to say something about the Friends of Trees and how that local organization is involved?
Well, I'll leave that to Arthur because he had the closest.
Sure,
Arthur.
yeah. Well, Friends of Trees, when we bought the property from Everett Custom Homes, we had to raise a lot of money. Friends of Trees was very helpful with that. They were our fiscal sponsors so that donors could give to the fund and get a tax deduction, and they're still doing that. We still have a lot of money to raise. It is going to be a park for everyone to enjoy. These are enormous, giant sequoias, and it's going to be a great park within an urban boundary, which is very unique, and we should be proud of that. So yes, Friends of Trees is a great organization, and you can go to their website and you'll see right how to give to
Yeah,
them.
and their website is friendsoftrees.org. You can also join them. I think one of the most fun volunteer things you can do in the city is go out with Friends of Trees on a planting day in your neighborhood and plant some trees. I've been a neighborhood coordinator for many years in a number of different neighborhoods, and you meet all sorts of interesting people. You get your arms dirty, and then 2 years later, 5 years later, you come back and the trees have grown, and it feels fantastic to have added your labor and your community building to a neighborhood. Did you want to say something, Robert?
For activists, we have a website called SoutheastUpLift.org and our neighborhood website, eastmoreland.org. Come to either one. We'll be glad to give you as much as we've learned on activism, to be aggressive, to be proactive, and to make sure you protect your part of the urban canopy. We're not necessarily brilliant, but we've been working very hard and we learn each time around. So when you're wondering what to do, give us a call. We will really try to help.
Yeah, great. Paul, you have something you would like to add?
Also like to thank the Audubon Society. They punch way above their weight, and they've been an incredible resource to us when we've had technical questions, and we're fortunate to have them. The other thing I'd like to just throw out is, in terms of infill, a lot of these things kind of come together, and one of the things in our neighborhood is I am not adverse to anybody putting a new structure in our neighborhood. In fact, in a lot of ways, we realize that the house that we lost on the property where the trees are, that was an older house that had been there 100 years. There was some structural damage to it. It would be a reasonable thing to go ahead and develop an alternative property there. But that can be done in a way that's respectful of the neighborhood and of the environment that's already there. And again, our objection is not to the fact that somebody's going to do new construction somewhere in southeast Portland, but it's that it needs to be careful and thoughtful, and it needs to preserve what's in the neighborhood rather than simply destroy it and replace it with something else.
Yeah, I really agree with that. I think that's important. What a lot of the guys that were working on the Sequoia site, they'd say, oh, you guys are just anti-development. And that angers me, because I understand that houses need to get built. Sometimes trees do need to get cut down. That's okay, but that doesn't mean that when you see a bad decision being made, for instance, cutting down these huge trees when they don't have to be, that doesn't mean you shouldn't speak up about it. I think, I don't think people should let the argument be made that it's anti-development to say you can't cut down trees. It's very simple to build around something like that, and it's not a private property issue either. I think I've seen those comments like, if it's your property, you can do what you want, but America has never been a place where you could just pollute a river without impunity. And when you cut down a giant tree, it's very similar. It affects everyone around you, so especially in a neighborhood. So the idea that it's un-American to tell someone they can't cut down a big tree, I reject that. I think that's wrong.
Well, if you're a homeowner, you're not allowed to do it. So if you're a developer, I think basically the same sort of rule should apply.
It's interesting. I do believe if the people that want to cut down those trees had lived on that land and been part of the neighborhood, and they had talked to the neighborhood and said, we need to cut down these trees for this reason, it would have been a much different scenario. When a developer comes in, says nothing to the neighborhood, and just announces their plans, or doesn't even announce their plans, just shows up with chainsaws, that's not American, that's wrong.
Moreover, there's probably more money in it if they respect the land. Frank Lloyd Wright, by the way, would not have fared well in this environment. He was building houses around the environment. That's why they're beautiful, they're world famous. What we saw here was someone who wanted to build a suburban tract home, and sadly, the trees, the grass, the landscape was in the way. We need to educate them a little bit. And we tried a bit of that with Mr. Remmers. We had some very significant architects in to talk to him. And one of the things about Arthur's work is that part of the land where the trees aren't, he's got a more environmentally interested architect to build a home.
Yeah, that's an important lesson. I really hope people will visit this site. It's on off of 36 and Martin Street in Portland, and we have another developer who is building a house right next to the trees, which is something that Mr. Remmers claimed was impossible. He wrote a letter to the neighborhood saying the trees were a hazard and had to be cut down, which just was not true. I mean, that's an excuse that developers will often use to cut down a big tree, but we have a house being built right there that is proof that Mr. Remmers, in fact, he even at one point wanted to build a house there after writing that letter. So I think developers like that need to be more honest.
Oh no, I would much rather build a house next to a tree that's going to be here in 3,000 years than sit in a suburban tract without the character and the nature preserved. And I hope he'll learn a lesson from this.
So the trees in our neighborhood were healthy. They will be there 100 years from now, 200 years from now, if they're left to their own devices.
Well, I'll be sitting under them.
Yeah.
That would be a good place for me too.
I mean, I heard one of the things I heard people saying, like the arborists, or not they were just tree service guys who were saying, well, your house, someone had to cut down trees to build your house, which is true, yes. But someone also made the effort to save trees hundreds of years ago, and that's why we love Portland. And so if everyone built houses like Everett Custom Homes or Renaissance Homes, then there would be no trees for the next generation. It would just be a bunch of small. It just wouldn't be Portland the way we like it.
Great. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up for our talk. You've heard from these gentlemen. We have plenty of websites. We're all over Facebook. We're on nextdoor.com. We've got Southeast Uplift's website. Feel free to go to the Friends of Trees website. Go out and plant some trees. Go out and visit some trees. You know, next time you're out and about in your neighborhood, look around. What's the biggest tree in your neighborhood? You know, go and get to know your neighborhood. So, you know, this has been fantastic. I imagine that this conversation will continue probably for the rest of our lives and perhaps our children's lives. And, you know, it's political season as well. 2016 is upon us. There's going to be lots of opportunities to go in front of politicians in public places. Ask them, you know, what do you think of the tree code? What do you think of what's going on in our neighborhoods? What do you think of infill development? All these different questions. You can also read your local neighborhood newsletter. The Southeast Examiner has like ongoing coverage right now of this issue. So please pick a thread, go out, get involved, talk to your neighbors about this, post online, find out what's going on. And that's what makes Portland great, is our activity and our care for this place. So please join us. Come get to know us. We are approachable. 11 a.m. at Clinton and 41st every Saturday. We'll be there. Come say hi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Albert.